Hello, YouTube. I think this will be a long one, so let's get right into it. I'm starting with some questions from my last AMA that I didn't answer because the rule was I would only answer one question per comment per day. As a result, in these first couple of questions, I will have already answered the first question in the comment. If you want to see the answer to those questions, I suggest you go watch my first AMA Answers video. Feminism is for Nobody asks, why am I such a useless cunt that makes awful videos? I mean, I agree with that statement, but I just can't pin down the precise source of failure and cuntishness. Well, in the 10 months since you asked this question, we haven't really interacted much, and I don't recall seeing many videos from you. And checking your channel now, I see that all your recent videos are of the extremely short parody variety. I'd wager the reason for this change is largely due to you getting a girlfriend, which you've been very public about. This is understandable since new close personal relationships are bound to take up a lot of time, and we all only have a limited amount of time and mental energy to go around. So to answer your question, the reason you were a useless cunt that made awful videos was because you were a thirsty single young man. That issue appears to have resolved itself. Feminism is for Nobody asks, have you got any interests outside of the stuff we do here on the internet, such as studying history, reading certain books, taking cock in the ass? My main other interests are films, sports, reading for leisure, and experiencing the beauty of the world through travel. I have never tried taking cock in the ass, but I have no desire to try it, since having sex with women is more than satisfactory for me at this point in my life. Bubska II asks, do you think Milo Yiannopoulos is a good person to represent the shitlordosphere? The short answer is no. The long answer is that to understand Milo, you have to understand that he is literally an attention whore. He will always do whatever he can to get as much attention as possible without inconveniencing or harming himself. He doesn't seem to care much whether it's positive or negative attention, but like any human, he seems to prefer the positive variety. And he seems to take particular delight in trying to turn negative attention into positive attention. If you'd like examples, watch any video in which he is, for a time, not the center of attention. He begins to pout like a child and will eventually do something to try and get the attention back onto himself. For another example, watch his recent appearance on Bill Maher, where he openly insulted the intelligence of the panel in an attempt to make sure he remained the main topic of conversation. So why does that make him a bad representative for the shitlordosphere? Because a good representative would care about the same things as the people he represents and would care about the people he represents. And with Milo, it's impossible to tell whether he actually cares about something or is just acting like it to get the attention that comes with it. So Milo, in the end, is only ever going to be a good representative for Milo. I honestly won't be surprised if in a few years people get tired or bored with him, and then he'll be forced to more and more drastic measures to stay relevant enough to garner the levels of attention he's now used to. Tom Perfect asks, Black Pigeon Speaks, the channel that brought the Why Women Destroy Civilizations video that racked up a shit ton of views and likes, was asked by some woman why he basically blames all the problems on women. Here was his response, which may pretty much sum up his overall stance that women should not vote. Like it or not, the enfranchisement of women and their voting patterns, forcing every issue to the left, is the reason for most of the chaos you see in the West today. Well, some women would rather this not happen, especially mothers. Many, if not most women, 35 and younger, support the current leftist paradigm. Yes, men are the ones in positions, but they have also shifted to the left as the broader culture that has shaped itself via female voting patterns. The men in positions also speak of solidarity, using one's heart and a slew of other feminized adjectives when speaking of the migrants and social problems in general. The West, through democracy, has been feminized, and what you are witnessing is a female-centric society, the West, coming into close contact with aggressive male-dominant societies, African/Islam, and the attending rape of the former and inability to protect itself will spell disaster if Western women are allowed to continue to lead. Does he have a point, if any? I think he does have some point, I don't agree with his conclusions though, since women are not a monolith and do not all think or act in the same way. I will grant that women on average do think differently than men and are more likely to make decisions based on emotion than men. I also agree that Western society has become largely feminized and that this is an issue because there are certain advantages to the traditional male way of doing things. The way to deal with this issue, though, is not to engage in the oppression of women to keep them from unduly influencing society. That's not going to make things better, and if it happens, we'll likely just start the swinging of the pendulum of oppression, with women taking control again at some point, then men, then women, with each change bringing with it death and destruction. The way I would propose dealing with it is to focus on societal change. We need to fight against the feminization of society in all the areas it has gone too far, and find a way to achieve balance of society so that neither men nor women feel like society is influenced too far in either direction. But since the issue is societal in nature, it's going to take significant time to change anything unless you take power violently and suppress all resistance. I would hope we can all agree that making societal changes in that fashion is highly undesirable. Madam Savage asks, here's my question. Are your eyes actually brown? If not, I'm calling the cops for false advertisement. My eye is indeed brown. What you're seeing is, after all, a picture of my eye, and other than cropping it, I have not edited the photo in any way. Terrence Jackson asks, would you mind if, either in a future AMA video or a video on the topic of abortion in general, you could share your thoughts on abortion in cases of rape and incest? Seeing that you're not really in favor of abortion in general, I'm curious to know if you have any caveats when it comes to this matter. I did make a video about abortion in general in the time since this question was asked, but I'm not sure I addressed this question specifically. In the case of rape, I'd be okay with someone getting an abortion. In the case of incest, I'd prefer to see some evidence that the child will have birth defects before I was supportive, I guess you could say, of the abortion. The difference is I'm assuming in the case of incest the sex was consensual. Otherwise, it falls into the category of rape. In either case, though, my opinion is irrelevant, since it's not my fetus in question, and I don't think I have the right to tell other people whether or not they can get an abortion. Sam Hunter asks, what are your thoughts on this video? The video in question is by BaseFizz. I never know how to pronounce his name. He also goes by Zerse, and the video is entitled, My Problem with Quote-Unquote Empowered Female Characters. So the basic argument here is that strong female characters are good, whereas empowered female characters are not. The difference being that strong female characters become strong when it makes sense in the plot, but maintain their femininity, whereas empowered female characters are basically male characters in disguise who can only maintain their power by making other men look bad. I agree with the sentiment of the video, but not really the way the argument was presented. The main issue really seems to be bad writing versus good writing. I don't really care whether a character is male or female as long as they are believable. If the character is, for example, able to beat up everyone they meet with ease, I want that to make sense. In the case of male characters, that means I'd like to see them be bigger and stronger than the people they're beating up. And if they're not, and that's the case with most female characters, I'd like to see some explanation of their ability, like perhaps they've gone through extensive training, and I'd also like to see a fighting style that doesn't rely on brute strength. Zerse also complains about empowered female characters who show a lack of any real emotional or character development. But that's not a female character issue. That's a bad writing issue for any character. Any character that doesn't develop over the course of the plot is a poorly written character. This is not an issue specific to female characters. The only difference is that the audience is likely to have different standards and expectations of male and female characters. This may be due to experience, stereotypes, prejudices, or previously seen tropes, but these expectations exist regardless of the reasons, and good writers need to account for them. Thus, a good writer is going to need to use different methods to make their female character's development seem real than they would use for a male character. It seems a lot of writers like to pretend that there are no different expectations. They confuse what they'd like the world to be like with what it's really like, and the result is badly written female characters. Learn Social Justice asks, what policies that SJWs have enacted in the past 20 years do you oppose? Well, first of all, this appears to be a copy and pasted set of questions that this person posts all over the place, but I'm going to answer them anyway. The policies that I oppose off the top of my head include social justice tribunals, hate speech laws, campus diversity rules, affirmative action, domestic violence laws and funding for domestic violence shelters, the legality of circumcision, and I'm sure there are others. That's just off the top of my head. Now, to be fair, not all of those were first created within the last 20 years, but in each case, social justice warriors have continued to promote these policies. Learn Social Justice asks, what BLM policy goals do you oppose? The closest thing to an official BM policy list I could find was something called Campaign Zero, which is presented as an official Black Lives Matter policy list. I'm not going to go through the entire list of policies, though, just the ones I directly oppose. First off, I oppose the creation of community oversight committees, as I strongly suspect these will be ideologically driven committees focused on agendas like protecting everyone except white people and men from police. Specifically, the proposed committee includes no oversight for its own activities, while granting itself extensive funding and power over the police department, including the ability to hire and fire the police chief. Second, I oppose the proposed change to the Department of Justice Code, wherein officers could be prosecuted for civil rights violations even if they did not willfully violate anyone's rights. Third, I oppose the proposed quote-unquote community representation initiative, which is essentially affirmative action, wherein police officers would be hired based on their race rather than their merits. This proposal also specifically mentions white men as being the overrepresented group, so this is further evidence that these proposals ideologically are going to be focused on improving things for everyone except white men. Fourth, I oppose the proposed new police training with a focus on implicit and explicit bias training, because those are not likely to be based on scientifically valid methodology. Fifth, I oppose the proposed waiving of fees and other penalties for low-income people, as it would essentially create a situation in which some rules simply don't apply to poor people. For example, under these proposed new rules, poor people could easily get away with never paying traffic tickets. Sixth, and finally, I oppose the proposed changes to police union contracts that essentially allow for mob justice to be used against police officers accused of misconduct, and especially worrying, forces police officers to take lie detector tests and have those tests be used as evidence against them. Lie detector tests are notoriously unreliable as evidence. So I think that's enough BLM policy goals that I've gone through that I oppose. Learn Social Justice asks, what part of social justice theory do you disagree with? You would need to define social justice theory for me first. If you're referring to Rawls' theory of justice, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to read entire books in order to answer a question for a video I'm making as a hobby. Learn Social Justice asks, which part of systemic racism do you disagree with in the book Racist America, Roots, Current Realities, or wiki article on institutional racism? Again, I'm not going to read an entire book, and in the case of the Wikipedia article, I checked, and when copied into Microsoft Word, it comes to 54 pages, size 12 single-spaced. So again, I'm not going to take the time required to read through that whole thing. In a general sense, I disagree with the ideas of systemic and institutional racism in that most people who apply these concepts regularly confuse correlation with causation. For example, in the introduction of the Wikipedia article is this quote: "When white terrorists bomb a black church and kill 5 black children, that is an act of individual racism, widely deplored by most segments of the society." Well, no, that's not automatically a case of racism. It may be, but if we only know the races of the killer and the victims, and we know nothing about the motivations of the killer, we can't say one way or another if racism is involved. So right there, in the introduction to the Wikipedia article on institutional racism, is a perfect example of how people, in order to spread the idea that racism is everywhere, will just assume that anything bad done by white people against black people is an example of racism. Learn Social Justice asks, what part of systemic inequality do you disagree with in the book Poverty and Power, The Problem of Structural Inequality? Again, I'm not going to read an entire book, But looking at the information I can find online about the book, I strongly suspect that once again I'd find an example of confusion between correlation and causation. Learn Social Justice asks, which books on social justice have you read? I can't honestly say I've read any. I've read a number of fiction books that are clearly written with a social justice agenda in mind, which is an unfortunate inevitability if you read books from so-called best of lists. I've read a number of books regarding human nature, psychology, philosophy, and that sort of thing, but none have been explicitly about social justice. Frankly, unless I were setting out to do a critique, I don't see the point in taking the time to read something that I know is probably going to be based on some fundamentally flawed premises and assumptions. Red Robot asks, as the brown eye of Sauron, is the Lord of Darkness keeping up with his fiber? No, unfortunately the Dark Lord Sauron is nourished entirely by the One Ring, which provides only a form of protein and thus not nearly enough fiber. I'd wager that's why he's always in such a foul mood, honestly, as nothing seems to alleviate his bowel issues. Sadly, I must pay the price for this unfortunate situation. Red Robot asks, does orc chili really cause a burning sensation? Well, it depends on what you mean. Chili made by orcs will cause an extreme burning sensation, but is really quite filling and gives you lots of energy. Chili made from orcs is poisonous to most creatures, and I've been told the sensation is more of an aching feeling than a burning one. Golden Slumber asks, if you could make one prominent feminist change allegiance to our side, who would you choose and why? I'm not sure I can honestly answer this with the information I have at my disposal. My answer, in reality, would be whichever feminist has the most independent power and influence. My first instinct was to go with whoever's in charge of the National Organization for Women, who happens to be someone called Terry O'Neill. But as we've seen in the past, any feminist who changes sides is simply excommunicated without feminism itself changing much, if at all. So if I were to make one feminist change sides, it would need to be someone with enough money and or power that they could still influence society even if feminism as a whole turns its back on them. So for now, my best answer would be, I guess, Beyonce? Dr. Grukar McNinja Sixth Gun asks, which prominent anti-feminist / anti-SJW / skeptic type YouTuber would you most want to collab with and why? My answer is Vernaculus. My first instinct was to say Philip DeFranco, if he even counts, because I enjoy his content and collaborating with him would give me tons of attention, views, and subscribers. But then I considered, would I even want those subscribers? And the answer is no, probably not. I'd much rather get a bunch of Vernaculus' subscribers. I think we have somewhat similar ways of thinking, and his audience would probably be a better fit for me than most other YouTubers' audiences. And I realize after saying this that this is a very cynical answer. I didn't pick the person I liked the most or who I'd enjoy working with. I chose who would get me the best new subscribers. And really that's because that is how I see one-off collaborations. If I were going to be working with someone long-term on a series of videos, my answer would be different. But if it's just going to be one video, then it's more about my content being exposed to a new audience than about working with someone I like. Little Miss Anonymous asks, why the hell do you watch my videos? They are garbage. I watch your videos because I like your ideas and the way you deliver them. You're a very thoughtful person and choose issues I find interesting and address them in ways I can appreciate. I'd suggest all my subscribers go check out your channel because if you like my stuff, you'll probably like Anon's. Little Miss Anonymous asks, toasted or not toasted? I had to clarify what she meant by this, and she was referring to sandwiches, apparently. So it depends on the type of bread and what's between the bread. If the bread already has a crust and the filling is somewhat dry, then I'd say untoasted. Usually, though, I prefer toasted, especially if that involves heating the fillings of the sandwich. I almost always prefer my food hot rather than room temperature or cold, and I'm not sure why so many people seem fine with things like room temperature deli meat. Little Miss Anonymous asks, I want to know what else you toast besides sandwiches. The first thing that comes to mind is marshmallows. In that case, toasted is far superior, although I'd prefer no marshmallows at all. They're too sweet. I am awesome at toasting marshmallows, by the way. Most people end up burning them instead of getting a nice golden brown all around the outside. The key is to put it near the coals, but not all the way in them, and don't expose it to direct flames. There's also, of course, things like single slices of bread, Pop-Tarts, toaster pastries, and all of those things I prefer toasted. The Lonely Lobo asks, where do you see your channel in the next few years? I'd expect to keep growing at my currently modest pace. I expect I'll have a few videos here and there that get upwards of, say, 10,000 views, and I expect the topics I discuss to change as society and the current events of the day change. But otherwise, I don't expect any significant real changes or massive growth to my channel. Hopefully my sound quality continues to improve as well. The Lonely Lobo asks, who is your favorite feminist? My favorite feminist is a friend of mine who I will not name here. She has been the source of a number of my video topics, and she often shares a lot of extreme left-wing and feminist articles and videos, but with detailed explanations of which aspects she agrees with and which she does not. She is also completely open to discussion and disagreement and is capable of defending her viewpoints without ever resorting to fallacies or personal attacks. The Lonely Lobo asks, what political beliefs do you hold? I can best be described as a small market capitalist. Basically, I believe capitalism is the best system, but it doesn't work well on a global or even national scale usually. In terms of rules and laws, I generally subscribe to the harm principle, where if it's not hurting anyone else and everyone involved is fully consenting, I have no issue with it. I also, however, think that the greater good and the majority rule are sometimes necessary and are sometimes the best way to do things. For my more specific views, I suggest you continue to watch my videos, and if there's a specific topic you'd like me to address, I'm always open to suggestions. The Lonely Lobo asks, if you had a critique towards the skeptic community, what would it be? My critique is that it's not doing a good enough job of guarding against dogmatic thinking in its own community, and really should be making the distinction between the community of people who actually cares about making the world better and the community that's just in it for the lulz. Distinction should also be made between different groups based on how they'd like to see society change, and I'd like to see more criticism response videos and more disagreement between and within these different groups within the so-called skeptic community. Petrock508 asks, has anyone ever radically changed your opinion on something, and by extension, has anyone on this platform? I had a teacher who once radically changed the way I view corporations. I'm actually planning to make a video about how I view them, so I won't get into that in detail here. In terms of people on this platform, I can't think of any one person in particular. I mean, it's rare that my views are changed by listening to just one person. They could always be misrepresenting the facts, right? But I can see that my views on the men's rights movement in particular have been changed, but it's been by watching a variety of different YouTubers. Petrock508 asks, what is, in your opinion, your most controversial belief? I'd probably say my views on abortion as expressed in my video on the topic, specifically my belief that both the father and the mother should have to legally consent before an abortion can take place. Also, I guess depending on where I am in the world, my belief that feminism is on the whole both wrong and bad for society, that can be a pretty controversial view. Petrock508 asks, what is your opinion on the Dear White People drama? I haven't seen the movie, but if you're referring to the trailer for the show, I think there's been some who've overreacted, but some who are justified in their outrage. The trailer certainly seemed like it was going to be yet another white people are bad thing, and the title itself lends itself to that interpretation. I've heard that in reality, the movie was actually a thoughtful exploration of the issues, so I'm hopeful that the show will be too, although honestly, I probably won't watch it. Uatu Omega asks, you've been granted very specifically limited magical powers. You're able to make or remake one film and cast your dream actors, living or dead, at any age. Which film would it be? Who would you cast? And what changes would you make? Monetary budget isn't an issue. Locations from anywhere between the Earth and the Moon inclusive are allowed. The film must be edited to be less than 4 hours long. Answering this question probably took as much time as all the other questions combined. It actually kept me up at night deciding what film and who to cast. I had a bunch of ideas, but I decided to go with one that everyone will be able to relate to. My other choices were honestly rather obscure, and really who's going to care about who I cast for the film adaptation of a book you've probably never read. So my choice is to remake The Return of the King. The Lord of the Rings is one of my all-time favorite books, and I thought this was the worst of the 3 adaptations Peter Jackson made, and I have never forgiven him for it. Before I get into what changes I would make to the story or production, I'm going to reveal my cast. Since this is a story intended to be part of a British mythology, I kept my cast almost entirely to British people, or those who I know with certainty can do an excellent British accent. I have also chosen to recast every role in the film just for fun. So without further ado, I give you the cast of Return of the King. Playing Frodo will be Gary Oldman. Frodo in human years would be about 30 during the events of the film, so that's how old Gary Oldman would be for this. Whoever plays Frodo needs to be a great actor with a lot of range, and I think Oldman fits the bill. Playing Samwise Gamgee will be a young Brendan Gleeson, another role that calls for an excellent actor, and I think Brendan Gleeson is an excellent actor. Playing Gandalf the White will be Laurence Olivier. I thought Ian McKellen did a great job as Gandalf the Grey, but was very ill-suited to playing Gandalf the White. Olivier would have been able to handle playing the Grey version, but he would have been absolutely perfect as Gandalf the White. Aragorn will be played by Daniel Day-Lewis. He was also Peter Jackson's first choice for the role, and on that at least we can agree. He has the right look and presence about him to play both Ranger Aragorn and King Aragorn, and it's hard to tell how old he is, which again is perfect for a character who ages differently than a normal human. Next up is Legolas, who will be played by Peter O'Toole, Gimli, who will be played by Liam Neeson, Merry, who will be played by Colin Firth, and Pippin, who will be played by Alec Guinness. All 4 are of course excellent actors and should be able to personify their characters quite well. I should note that in my version, Gimli and the Hobbits are not comedic characters like Peter Jackson made them. The Hobbits will instead be light-hearted characters rather than comedic ones, and I've cast them accordingly. That finishes up the Fellowship. I'll now move on to the main villains of our tale. Sauron will be played by no one, since he never says or does anything directly in the story. The Witch King will be voiced by Alan Rickman. Gollum will be played by Kevin Spacey, using similar motion capture technology that was done with Andy Serkis, although stuntmen will likely be required for some of the physical aspects of the role. I thought Serkis did a good job overall, but I found his performance irritating and over the top at times. I think Spacey would do a much better job of making Gollum a more serious, believable character. Saruman, who will not be killed off needlessly at the beginning of the film, will be played by Richard Burton. Saruman's main weapon is his voice, and Burton certainly has that. Now let's move on to the men of Gondor. Denethor will be played by Anthony Hopkins. I needed someone for the role who could portray power and wisdom as well as madness. Hopkins can do that in his sleep. His son Faramir will be played by Kenneth Branagh. Imrahil, Prince of Dol Amroth, who plays a major role in the battles in the film, will be played by Cary Grant. This role requires the viewer to instantly see the character as someone with dignity and royal blood. Cary Grant just standing there in a scene would be able to convey that. Baragon, the member of the Citadel Guards who befriends Pippin and later saves Faramir's life, will be played by Dominic West. Baragon's son Virgil, who also befriends Pippin and shows him around the city, will be played by Asa Butterfield. Next, we'll talk about the casting for the Men of Rohan, who will not be British actors, for the most part, because the Men of Rohan originate from the north and have a different culture. As a result, I have a mix of Scandinavian and British actors in the role. Playing King Theoden will be Max von Sydow. For his nephew Éomer, I unfortunately couldn't think of or find a Scandinavian actor I liked enough for this very important role. So instead, I went with a British actor I really like and I think could pass for Scandinavian if needed. So Éomer will be played by Tom Hardy. His sister Éowyn will be played by Liv Ullmann, who has the look of sorrow necessary for this role down pat. but she's also capable, I think, of playing the heroic aspects of the character as well. Finally, the villainous Wormtongue will be played by Norwegian actor Axel Hennie. Now I'll go through the big-name characters from previous films who make only smaller appearances in this one. Elrond will be played by David Bowie, who campaigned for the part but didn't get it for some reason. His daughter Arwen, who will have played a very minor role in the story, unlike in Peter Jackson's films, will be played by Audrey Hepburn. Elrond's twin sons Elladan and Elrohir will both be played by Michael Caine. Galadriel will be played by Meryl Streep. Reluctant as I am to give her work after that Golden Globe speech of hers, I think she has the necessary gravitas and the elvish look for the role. Her husband Celeborn will be played by Bill Nighy. Treebeard will be voiced by Orson Welles, and Bilbo will be played by John Hurt. And I'll finish with the casting of some minor characters. The Mouth of Sauron will be played by Tim Curry. The orcs who capture Frodo, Gorbag, and Shagrat will be played by Robbie Coltrane and Rowan Atkinson, respectively. Finally, Hobbit farmer Tom Cotton will be played by Tim Roth, and his daughter Rosie will be played by Julie Andrews. Now, with the casting out of the way, we can talk about a few of the changes I would make to the film. The first thing I would change is the overall tone of the movie. This is an epic tale about good and evil, and my version of the film would have a much more serious tone. The skill of the actors will be used to make the audience believe in the fantastical setting and the story and to identify with these mythical characters. The two main themes of the story will be Frodo and Sam's desperate struggle to reach Mount Doom against all odds, and Gandalf's desperate attempts to organize the defense of Minas Tirith. Most of the other characters will mainly be taking part in the epic battle that makes up the majority of the film. Now for some specific changes I would make. This film starts with Sam trying to rescue Frodo. The previous film will have ended with their battle with Shelob instead of that taking place at the beginning of this film. This part of the film begins Sam's hero turn, which continues for the rest of the film as he is the main force keeping Frodo from giving up. This completes Sam's character arc from servant to hero and friend. Meanwhile, through Pippin, we will learn that the defenders of Minas Tirith have little hope and morale is incredibly low. This is emphasized by the fact that dark clouds come from Mordor and block out the sun. From this point on, every scene in the movie takes place in night-like darkness, at least until the darkness is lifted. The forces of Mordor are led by the Witch King himself on a black horse, not a disfigured orc. The story builds the Witch King up as a character and specifically portrays the beginning of the battle as himself and Gandalf organizing their forces against one another. Faramir, meanwhile, is portrayed as a heroic rather than pathetic character, and when he is injured and taken for dead, it further cripples the morale of the defenders. The audience should be made to feel that Minas Tirith has no chance of defending itself. They don't have trebuchets throwing bits of the city at Sauron's army. All they can do is sit behind their walls and quail in fear as the Nazgul fly above them. Their one advantage is their great city gate, which has never been breached by an enemy. The Witch King, however, has brought a great battering ram, which comes to bear on the gate. However, it takes the power of the Witch King himself to break the gates down, and he alone rides through them, not a bunch of trolls like in the original film. What happens next is exactly what happens in the book. In fact, I'll read it to you. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul. A great black shape against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, under the archway that no enemy ever had yet passed, and all fled before his face. All save one. There, waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Shadowfax, who alone among the free horses of the earth endured the terror, unmoving, steadfast as a graven image in Rath-Dinan.
"You cannot enter here,"
said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted.
"Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go."
The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fire shone between it and the mantled shoulders vast and dark. From mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter.
"Old fool,"
he said,
Old fool, this is my hour. Do not see death when you see it. Die now and curse in vain.
And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. Gandalf did not move. And in that very moment, away behind in some courtyard of the city, a cock crowed. Shrill and clear he crowed, recking nothing of wizardry or war, welcoming only the morning that in the sky far above the shadows of death was coming with the dawn. And as if in answer, there came from far away another note. Horns, horns, horns. In deep Mindolian sides they dimly echoed, great horns of the north wildly blowing. Rohan had come at last. This should be the beginning of the turning point in the film. Up until this point, everything should be death and despair. Next, we can have a flashback of how the Rohirrim got there at that time. Then we get to see them attack the army encircling Minas Tirith and clear the enemy away from the gate. The forces of Gondor pour out, led by Prince Imrahil, and the battle rages. It's at this point that Theoden dies and Éowyn kills the Witch King. It soon becomes clear, however, that the army of Sauron is still too large, and the good guys are about to be overwhelmed. It's at this point that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli finally show up. They haven't been shown or mentioned for the entire movie up to this point, so the audience had perhaps forgotten about them. So a bunch of ships arrive, and out of them pours Aragorn leading an army from the south of Gondor, not a swarm of green ghost insects. See, it will have been made clear earlier in the film that Gondor has plenty of soldiers, but they're trapped in the south fighting a fleet of pirates. Aragorn has used his ghost army to defeat the pirates, and he's brought the armies of Gondor with him to save Minas Tirith. See, in the original Peter Jackson film, Aragorn brings the ghosts to Minas Tirith, and from that point on, the battle loses all sense of risk and drama. You see Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fighting, but there's really no point in them doing that because the Green Swarm is able to defeat Sauron's army so easily. It begs the question of why Aragorn didn't just bring the ghost army with him to Mordor and use them to defeat Sauron himself. The real reason is because the ghost army's original promise had been to help defend Gondor against a pirate invasion, so by helping Aragorn defeat the pirates, they were fulfilling their original promise. Anyway, with the battle being fought entirely by humans, there's still drama, and the many heroic acts by our heroes are necessary before the battle is finally won. Now the story switches its focus to Frodo and Sam, and eventually it culminates in all the rest of the characters traveling to the Black Gate to offer themselves as bait so Frodo can get to Mount Doom. We all know what happens next. Gollum shows up and bites Frodo's finger off, then accidentally destroys the ring and himself in the process. The Eagles then come and rescue Frodo and Sam, everyone is reunited, and Aragorn and Arwen get married. The hobbits then begin their journey home, where they eventually arrive in the Shire to find that everything has changed. What follows is the four hobbits demonstrating how much each of them has grown as characters. Frodo is now a complete pacifist, and the other three are all heroes. They save the Shire from Saruman, who is then killed. And then a montage later, Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and Celeborn all head off on the ships to the afterlife. And so ends the film after about 4 hours of runtime. Ideally, it would be released in long form with an intermission, but it could also be split up like the last Harry Potter film. The logical splitting point, I think, would be at the end of the battle at Minas Tirith. And that's how I would change The Return of the King. Point Curation asks, what's the most positive improvement you've made to your life in the last 2 years? Probably putting away some money in long-term, low-risk investments. I know that's kind of boring, but I honestly haven't made many changes to my life in the last 2 years. Most of my major positive life changes took place more than 2 years ago. Ace Invoke asks, have you heard the good word of the Splugorth? Well, my maternal grandmother was a member of this ancient and powerful race. I'm extremely proud to have Splugorth ancestry. Omegon asks, how often do you clean your eye? Never. This eye has beheld so much beauty in this world that it would be a sin to clean it. Omegon asks, are we friends? Friends is actually a really hard thing to define. What makes one person I know a friend and another not a friend? How well do I need to know the person? How long do I have to have known the person? How much do I have to like the person? It's all very subjective. I suppose it's safe to say we're friends, but I think we're closer to being acquaintances than to being close friends, if that makes any sense. The fact that we've never actually met in person certainly makes it more difficult to think of you when I think of who my friends are. But we've certainly interacted enough times and seem to get along well enough for us to qualify as friends. And I certainly like you. So yeah, we can be friends if you want. Omegon asks, why are you moist? Because I am the origin of all moisture.
Come, creature of moistness, and worship at the altar of the great moist one.
Text-based spider, I think, asks, will this channel make the internet great again? No, I don't think it will. I'd like to think I can make a small impact here and there, but I simply don't have the charisma, accent, boobs, or time available to grow this channel large enough to be able to have an impact on the internet as a whole. So I think you'll have to settle for this channel making a small corner of the internet great again. And that's the last of the questions. I hope you enjoyed my answers. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. I don't know when the next AMA video I'll do will be, so I don't know whether I'll answer your questions just in comments or save them for another video. But I want to thank you for watching. I'm Positive Improvement, and I wish you all the best.